They called him the Iceman of London. Sebastian Thorne, the Duke of Blackwood, was a man who supposedly hadn't smiled since the mysterious death of his father 10 years ago. He destroyed business rivals with a single signature and ruined reputations with a mere glance. No woman dared approach him. No man dared cross him. But on the night of the winter solstice ball, when Lady Alice Vance ran into the dark gardens, humiliated, weeping and fleeing a scandal that threatened to destroy her life, she didn't just run into the darkness. She collided with him. And what happened next would shock the entire British aristocracy, revealing a secret that had been buried in blood for a decade. This isn't a fairy tale. This is the story of how a broken girl melted a frozen heart, and the dangerous price they both paid for it. The year was 1884, and the air inside the grand ballroom of the Ashworth estate was thick enough to choke on. It smelled of expensive French perfume beeswax candles and the stinging scent of judgment. Lady Alice Vance stood near the periphery of the dance floor, her fingers tightening around the fan her mother had left her before she passed. Alice knew she didn't belong here anymore. 3 years ago, the Vance family had been royalty in these circles. That was before her father, the Earl of Vance, had gambled away their fortune at the tables of Monte Carlo and then died of a stopped heart. Though the whispers said he took his own life to escape the debt collectors. Now Alice was 21, her dowry was non-existent, and she was wearing a dress of emerald silk that had been turned and mended 3 times. "Look at her!" a voice hissed from behind a fan nearby. It was Lady Genevieve, a woman whose beauty was only matched by her cruelty. Wearing last season's cut, I hear her aunt is selling the family silver just to keep the townhouse heated. Tragic. Her companion giggled. She really ought to accept Lord Crouch. He's the only one desperate enough to take a pauper. Alice stiffened her stomach, turning. Lord Reginald Crouch was a man of 50, with wandering hands, and a reputation that made maidservants cross the street to avoid him. But he was rich, and he had bought Alice's father's debts. "Alice, my dear." The voice made her skin crawl. She turned to see Lord Crouch approaching his face, flushed with too much brandy, his cravat slightly askew. He didn't look at her eyes. His gaze dropped immediately to her neckline. "Lord Crouch," Alice said, dipping into a curtsy that was polite but distant. "I hope you are enjoying the evening." "I am now," he slurred, stepping too close. The smell of stale tobacco and spirits washed over her. He reached out his clammy fingers, gripping her bare arm just above the elbow. "The orchestra is starting a waltz. I intend to claim it." I'm feeling faint, my lord." Alice lied, trying to pull her arm back. "I was just heading to the terrace for air." "Nonsense." Crouch snapped his grip, tightening painfully. "You've been avoiding me for weeks, girl. Do you think you have options? Do you think a penniless orphan gets to be choosy?" People were watching. Alice could feel the weight of 100 eyes. Lady Genevieve was smirking. The orchestra swelled, masking the sound of Alice's desperate whisper. "Please, you're hurting me." "I own your debts, Alice," Crouch hissed, leaning into her ear. "Which means I effectively own you. You will dance with me, and then you will let me drive you home. Or perhaps I'll call in the loans tomorrow, and your aunt will be on the street by noon." Panic sharp and blinding spiked in her chest. She didn't think. She reacted. Alice yanked her arm back with all her strength. The sudden movement caught Crouch off guard. He stumbled, stepping on the hem of her emerald dress. There was a loud, sickening rip. Music seemed to stop. The chatter died instantly. Alice stood frozen. A large tear ran up the side of her skirt, revealing the white petticoats beneath a scandalous display. Crouch stumbled back, looking furious. "You clumsy little—" he shouted, raising a hand as if to strike her. Alice didn't wait. Tears burned her eyes, hot and humiliating. She turned and ran. She pushed past the shocked Duchess of York, ignored the gasps of the crowd, and burst through the French doors onto the stone terrace. She didn't stop there. The terrace was still too close to the laughter, the judgment. She hiked up her ruined dress and ran down the stone steps into the vast, hedge-lined gardens of the Ashworth estate. The night air was freezing, biting at her exposed skin, but the cold felt better than the suffocation of the ballroom. She ran blindly, her vision blurred by tears turning corners in the labyrinth of hedges until her lungs burned and her legs gave out. She collapsed onto a stone bench near the old fountain, burying her face in her hands, her body shaking with sobs. She was ruined. Crouch would call the debts. It was over. She was so consumed by her grief that she didn't notice the scent of cigar smoke lingering in the cold air. She didn't notice the tall, dark shadow detaching itself from the pillar behind her. "I believe," a voice said, deep baritone and utterly devoid of warmth, "that is quite enough hysterics for one evening." Alice gasped, jumping to her feet. She spun around, wiping her eyes frantically. Standing in the shadows of the oversized oak tree was a man. He was tall, imposingly, so broad-shouldered, and dressed in black evening wear that was cut so sharply it looked like a weapon. As he stepped into the moonlight, Alice felt the breath leave her body. It was Sebastian Thorne, the Duke of Blackwood. He was undeniably handsome, with high cheekbones, a strong jawline, and hair as black as a raven's wing. But it was his eyes that terrified people. They were a piercing, icy grey, cold enough to freeze water. He was looking at her not with pity, but with mild irritation. "Your Grace," Alice stammered, dipping into a curtsy so low she nearly fell over. I didn't know anyone was here. I apologize for disturbing you." He took a slow drag from a thin cigar, the ember glowing orange in the dark. "This is the furthest point of the garden. I came here to avoid the noise of desperate mothers trying to auction off their daughters. It seems I failed to escape the drama." His words stung, but Alice straightened her spine. "I was not trying to be dramatic, Your Grace. I was leaving, with a torn dress and a face wet with tears." He stepped closer, towering over her. "You are Lady Alice Vance, are you not the late Earl's daughter?" "I am," she whispered. "And you were running from Reginald Crouch." It wasn't a question. I saw him corner you, a distasteful little man. He held my arm. He wouldn't let go." Alice hugged herself, shivering against the night wind. Sebastian studied her. For a second, the ice in his eyes seemed to crack, revealing something calculating. He took a step forward, and instinctively Alice stepped back. Suddenly, heavy footsteps crunched on the gravel path leading to their clearing. "Alice!" Lord Crouch's voice bellowed, slurred and angry. "You get back here. You don't walk away from me." Alice froze. Terror seized her. She looked at the hedge, looking for an escape route, but there was nowhere to go. Crouch burst into the clearing, his face purple with rage. "There you are!" Crouch lunged for her. "You think you can embarrass me? I'll teach you some respect, you penniless little Lord Crouch." The voice was quiet, deadly calm, and it cut through the air like a whip. Crouch stopped mid-stride. He blinked his eyes, adjusting to the shadows. When he saw the Duke of Blackwood standing there, the colour drained from his face instantly. Your Grace," Crouch stammered, suddenly sober. "I didn't see you. I was just disciplining this insolent girl. She owes me a great deal of money, and she thinks she can—" "You are trespassing," Sebastian said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't move. He simply radiated power. "And you are boring me." "But she—" Sebastian flicked the ash from his cigar onto the pristine gravel. "I do not care about your petty grievances, Crouch, but I do care about the peace of my evening. You have 5 seconds to leave my sight before I decide to purchase the bank that holds your mortgages and foreclose on your estate by morning." Crouch's mouth opened and closed like a fish. The threat was real. Everyone knew Blackwood had the wealth of a small nation. Of course, Your Grace. My apologies." Crouch cast one last hateful glare at Alice. "We aren't finished, Alice." He turned and scurried away into the darkness. Alice let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. Her knees buckled, and she grabbed the cold stone of the fountain to steady herself. "Thank you," she breathed. "You saved me." "I didn't save you," Sebastian said coldly. He walked over to her, removing his heavy black tailcoat. He draped it over her shoulders. The silk lining was warm from his body and smelled of expensive tobacco and sandalwood. "I merely removed a pest." Alice pulled the coat tighter around herself, shocked by the gesture. "Why?" Sebastian looked down at her. His expression was unreadable. "Because, Lady Vance, I have been watching you. You are desperate. You are ruined. And you have absolutely nothing left to lose." "Is that supposed to be a compliment?" Alice asked, a flash of her old spirit returning. "It is a qualification," Sebastian replied. "I am in need of a wife. Not a real one. I have no use for love or sentiment. I need a figurehead, someone to wear the diamonds, host the dinners, and keep society from asking questions about my private affairs." Alice stared at him, stunned. You are proposing—" "I am proposing a business arrangement," he corrected. "I will pay your father's debts. I will settle an allowance on your aunt. You will live in luxury at Blackwood Manor. In exchange, you will marry me. You will stay out of my wing of the house, and you will never ever ask me what I do behind closed doors." He extended a gloved hand. "Well, Lady Alice, do you wish to return to Lord Crouch and the poorhouse, or do you wish to make a deal with the devil?" Alice took his gloved hand. It was the only choice she had. In that moonlit garden, she sold her freedom to save her family, sealing a pact that would change the course of London society. 2 weeks later, Lady Alice Vance became the Duchess of Blackwood in a ceremony that the newspapers described as the union of the century. To the outside world, it was a fairy tale. Alice wore a gown of white satin imported from Paris, encrusted with 3,000 seed pearls. Sebastian stood at the altar of St. Paul's Cathedral, looking like a dark prince, devastatingly handsome and utterly unreadable. But Alice knew the truth. It was a performance. During the ceremony, when he slid the heavy gold band onto her finger, his hand was cold. He didn't look at her with affection. He looked at her with the scrutiny of a man inspecting an acquisition. When the Archbishop pronounced them man and wife, Sebastian didn't kiss her lips. He pressed a brief, chaste kiss to her forehead, stiff and mechanical. The carriage ride to Blackwood Manor was 3 hours of suffocating silence. The manor itself was a beast of a building. Located on the edge of the brooding Yorkshire moors, far from the bustling streets of London, it was a sprawling Gothic structure of grey stone and dark windows. As the carriage rolled up the gravel drive, rain began to lash against the glass, blurring the world outside. Sebastian exited the carriage first, not waiting to help her down. The footman, a young man named Arthur, hurriedly offered his hand to Alice. Inside the foyer was cavernous. A double staircase swept up to the shadows of the second floor. A line of servants stood rigid, led by a stern-faced woman in black bombazine. "Welcome home, Your Grace," the woman said, her voice devoid of emotion. "Mrs. Halloway." Sebastian nodded, removing his gloves. He turned to Alice, his expression hardening. "Alice, this is Mrs. Halloway. She runs the household. If you require anything, dresses, jewelry, a new horse, you ask her. You do not ask me." Alice felt a chill that had nothing to do with the draughty hall. "I understand." "Good." Sebastian signalled for a footman to take his coat. He checked his pocket watch. "Dinner is served at 7. We will eat together tonight to maintain appearances for the staff. After that, we will dine separately. I prefer to eat in my study." "Separately?" Alice asked, her voice trembling slightly. "But we are married." Sebastian stopped halfway to the stairs. He turned slowly, his grey eyes locking onto hers. "We have an agreement, Alice. Do not mistake a title for intimacy." He walked a few steps closer, lowering his voice so the servants wouldn't hear. "Here are the rules of your new life. Listen closely, because I will not repeat them. 1, you are the mistress of this house in name. You may redecorate the drawing rooms, host garden parties, and attend the opera. Be the Duchess society expects. 2, you will never question my whereabouts. If I am gone for days, you say nothing. And 3, his voice dropped to a dangerous whisper, the West Wing is forbidden. My study and my private quarters are behind the oak doors at the end of the gallery. You do not knock, you do not enter, you do not even look at them. Is that clear?" Alice swallowed hard, her heart pounding against her ribs. "And if I do?" Sebastian's face became a mask of stone. "Then, my dear wife, you will find yourself back on the street with your debts unpaid faster than you can blink." With that, he turned and ascended the stairs, disappearing into the shadows of the upper corridor, leaving Alice standing alone in the centre of the cold marble hall. That night, she slept alone in the master suite, a room larger than her entire childhood home, filled with silk and velvet, but empty of warmth. She locked the door, not because she feared he would come in, but because the emptiness of the house terrified her. A month passed. Life at Blackwood Manor was a strange, lonely existence. To the outside world, Alice was the envy of England. She had unlimited credit at the finest shops on Bond Street. She sent money to her aunt, ensuring the Vance family home was saved. She wore diamonds the size of robins' eggs. But inside the manor she was a ghost, haunting a museum. She rarely saw Sebastian. He would leave before she woke and return long after she had retired. Occasionally they would cross paths in the hallway. He would nod, polite and distant, like a stranger passing on the street. "Good morning, Your Grace," she would say. "Duchess," he would reply, not breaking stride. The staff treated him with a mixture of reverence and terror. Mrs. Halloway, the housekeeper, watched Alice like a hawk, ensuring she didn't step a toe out of line. But Alice was not a porcelain doll. She was a woman with a fire in her belly, and the isolation was beginning to grate on her nerves. She started to notice things, strange things. Sebastian's valet, an older man named Thomas, often carried trays of food to the West Wing that came back untouched. Late at night, Alice would hear pacing from the floor above, heavy, restless footsteps that went back and forth for hours like a caged animal. And then there was the date, October 14th. The mood in the house shifted as the date approached. The servants spoke in hushed whispers. Mrs. Halloway ordered all the drapes in the main hall drawn. "Why are we closing the house up?" Alice asked over breakfast, the only meal she ate in the dining room. Mrs. Halloway pursed her lips. "It is the anniversary, Your Grace. The Duke prefers darkness on this day." "The anniversary of what?" "The death of the old Duke, his father." Mrs. Halloway turned away, signaling the conversation was over. That evening a storm rolled in off the moors. Thunder shook the window panes, and lightning illuminated the long, dark corridors. Sebastian had not come down for dinner. In fact, he hadn't been seen since the morning. Alice sat in her room, trying to read a novel, but the words swam before her eyes. The wind howled outside, sounding like human voices. Then she heard it. It wasn't the wind, it was a crash, the sound of glass shattering. It was followed by a roar, a sound of pure, unadulterated agony. It came from the west wing. Alice stood up, her heart racing. The rules screamed in her head, "Do not enter, do not knock." But the sound came again, a heavy thud like a body hitting the floor, followed by silence. "He's hurt," she whispered. She didn't think about the contract. She didn't think about the money. She grabbed her candle and ran out of her room, her bare feet slapping against the cold floorboards. She sprinted down the long gallery, past the portraits of dead ancestors, toward the heavy oak doors of the west wing. They were unlocked. She pushed them open. The air inside was stale, smelling of old paper and whiskey. The corridor was dark, but a light flickered from under the door at the very end, Sebastian's study. Alice crept forward, her hand trembling so hard the candle wax dripped onto her thumb. She reached the study door and pushed it open. The room was in chaos. Bookshelf contents had been swept onto the floor. A crystal decanter of brandy lay shattered against the fireplace, the amber liquid pooling on the rug. A heavy armchair was overturned, and there in the center of the wreckage sat Sebastian. He was on the floor, his back against the leg of his heavy mahogany desk. His jacket was gone, his white shirt unbuttoned and stained with brandy. His head was in his hands, his fingers gripping his black hair so tightly his knuckles were white. He was shaking. The Iceman of London was trembling violently. "Sebastian," Alice whispered. His head snapped up. Alice gasped. She had expected anger. She had expected the cold, arrogant look he always wore. But the man looking at her wasn't cold. His eyes were red-rimmed and wild, filled with a raw, bleeding panic. There was a thin cut on his cheek where a shard of glass had grazed him. He looked like a boy who had been woken from a nightmare. "Get out!" he rasped, his voice cracked and broken. "I told you never to come here." "You're bleeding," Alice said, stepping into the room, ignoring his command. She set the candle down on a side table. "Sebastian, what happened?" "I said get out!" he roared, trying to stand up, but he stumbled, his balance gone. He fell back against the desk, clutching his chest as if he couldn't breathe. "Don't look at me, get out." "No," Alice said firmly. She crossed the room. She wasn't afraid of him anymore. She saw the truth. He wasn't a monster. He was a man in the grip of a panic attack, so severe he thought he was dying. She knelt beside him, avoiding the broken glass. "Look at me, Sebastian. Breathe." "I can't." He gasped, clawing at his shirt collar. "The walls, they're closing in. He's here. I can hear him." Who is here?" "My father." Sebastian whispered, a tear tracking through the dust on his face. "I killed him. I killed him, Alice." The confession hung in the air heavier than the thunder outside. Alice froze. The rumors had always said the old Duke died of a hunting accident. "You didn't," she said softly, reaching out to take his trembling hands. "You're in shock." "You don't know." He tried to pull away, but she held on tight. "Get away from me, Alice. I destroy everything I touch. That's why I'm cold. That's why I'm dead inside. If I let you in, I'll destroy you too." "I am already destroyed," Alice said, her voice fierce. "Remember, you bought a ruined woman. You can't break what is already broken." She pulled his hands to her chest, forcing him to feel the steady rhythm of her heart. "Breathe with me. In. Out." For a long, agonizing minute, he fought it. He stared at her with wild, terrified eyes, but slowly the warmth of her hands, The scent of her lavender soap and the steadiness of her presence pierced through his panic. His breathing slowed. His shoulders slumped. He collapsed forward, burying his face in the crook of her neck, sobbing dry, racking heaves against her shoulder. Alice didn't move. She wrapped her arms around the freezing, trembling Duke of Blackwood, holding him as the storm raged outside. She stroked his hair, realizing that the monster she had married was just a man carrying a burden too heavy for one soul to bear. But as she held him, she looked up and saw something on the desk above them. It was a letter, old and yellowed, lying open amidst the chaos. The handwriting was jagged. It read, "To my son Sebastian. The debt must be paid in blood. You can never escape what we did." Alice's blood ran cold. Sebastian hadn't just had a bad dream. He was being haunted by something real, something dangerous, and she had just walked right into the middle of it. The storm outside had quieted to a steady morning rain, but inside the study, the air was thick with the weight of confession. Alice did not leave. She sat on the Persian rug beside the Duke of Blackwood, holding a glass of water to his lips, as if he were a feverish child. Sebastian drank his hands, still shaking slightly, the wildness in his eyes fading into a hollow, haunted exhaustion. "Tell me," Alice whispered, setting the glass aside. She picked up a handkerchief and gently dabbed the cut on his cheek. "You didn't murder him in cold blood, Sebastian. I know you. You are cold, yes, and distant, but you are not a monster." Sebastian closed his eyes, leaning his head back against the heavy leg of the desk. "It was 10 years ago. I was 22. My father, he was not the man the public knew. He was a gambler, Alice. Worse than yours. But where your father lost money, mine lost his soul." He took a ragged breath. He had gotten involved with a group called the Syndicate, ruthless men who lent money on terms of flesh and blood. He owed them a fortune. When he couldn't pay, they demanded he sign over the deed to Blackwood Manor. They wanted the land for the coal deposits beneath the moors. Alice's hand paused in mid-air. "He was going to sell your home. He was going to sell everything," Sebastian corrected, his voice hardening. "He had signed the papers. I found him in this very room, drunk the deed on the desk, a pistol in his hand. He told me he was leaving for France, and leaving me to deal with the fallout. He laughed at me. He said I was too weak to stop him." Sebastian opened his eyes, and they were pools of grey anguish. "I tried to take the papers. He lunged at me. We wrestled. He was strong, even drunk. He grabbed the pistol. I tried to wrestle it away, and it went off." The silence in the room was deafening. "It was an accident," Alice said firmly. "It doesn't matter," Sebastian whispered. "The bullet went through his chest. He died instantly. But the worst part, Alice, the worst part is that when I saw him lying there dead, I didn't feel grief. I felt relief. I was glad he was gone. That is my sin. That is why I am cursed." "That is not a curse," Alice said, her voice fierce. She grabbed his chin, forcing him to look at her. "That is survival. You saved this house. You saved the people who work here. If the syndicate had taken over Mrs. Holloway, Thomas, the tenants, they would have been destitute. I covered it up," Sebastian continued, ignoring her absolution. "I made it look like he was cleaning the gun and it misfired. The coroner was an old family friend. He ruled it an accident. For 10 years I thought I was safe. I thought the secret died with him." He gestured vaguely to the yellowed letter on the desk. "Until tonight." Alice reached up and took the letter. She read the jagged handwriting again. "To my son Sebastian. The debt must be paid in blood. You can never escape what we did." "This isn't from your father," Alice said, frowning. "He's dead. This is from someone pretending to be him, or someone who knows." "The syndicate," Sebastian rasped. "They know I didn't pay the debt my father owed. They know the deed was never transferred. They've been waiting, watching." He suddenly gripped Alice's shoulders, his strength returning. "You have to leave. Tomorrow, I will send you to Italy. You have enough money in your personal account to live like a queen. You cannot be here when they come for me." Alice looked at him, really looked at him. For the first time, she saw the man beneath the title. He wasn't protecting his reputation, he was protecting her. The Iceman was willing to tear his life apart to ensure her safety. Something in her chest, a tight knot of fear and resentment she had carried since the wedding, loosened. "No," she said. Sebastian blinked. "What?" "I said no." Alice stood up, her emerald silk dress rustling. She picked up the letter, walked to the fireplace where the embers were still glowing, and tossed it in. They both watched as the paper curled, blackened, and turned to ash. "You bought me Sebastian," she said, turning back to him with a steely resolve. "You paid my debts. You saved my family. We are partners in this business arrangement, are we not? A Vance does not run from a fight, and a Duchess of Blackwood does not abandon her duke." Sebastian stared at her stunned. He stood up, slowly towering over her, but the intimidation was gone. In its place was a look of profound wonder. "You are a fool, Alice," he murmured, but his voice was soft. "Perhaps," she replied, stepping closer until she was merely inches from him. "But I am your fool. We will find out who sent this, and we will destroy them." For a moment, the air between them crackled with a new kind of tension, not fear, but something electric. Sebastian reached out his hand, hovering near her cheek, before he pulled back his walls, slamming back into place. "Go to bed, Alice," he said gruffly. "Lock your door." But as she left the room, she looked back. He was watching her, and for the first time in 10 years, the Duke of Blackwood didn't look entirely alone. 3 weeks later, the London season began in earnest. The Blackwood townhouse in Mayfair was opened, the dust sheets removed, and the chandeliers polished until they blazed like suns. To the public, the Duke and Duchess were the golden couple of the year. They attended the Opera Road in Hyde Park and hosted dinners, but privately they were at war. Sebastian had hired private investigators to trace the letter, but the trail was cold. Whoever had sent it was a ghost. Every shadow in London felt like a threat. Sebastian became paranoid, barely sleeping, and he never let Alice out of his sight. "You are suffocating me," Alice whispered one evening, as they stood in the foyer of Lady Harrington's grand estate, preparing to enter the most lavish masquerade ball of the season. "I am keeping you alive," Sebastian replied, adjusting the black velvet mask over his eyes. His hand lingered on the small of her back, possessive and heavy. "Stay close to me tonight. Do not accept drinks from anyone. Do not dance with anyone but me. Sebastian, we are surrounded by the peerage, not bandits." She sighed, adjusting her own mask, a delicate creation of white feathers and diamonds. "Wolves in silk are still wolves, Alice." They entered the ballroom. It was a kaleidoscope of color and sound. 1,000 candles flickered in crystal chandeliers reflecting off the jewels of the aristocracy. The orchestra played a sweeping waltz. For the first hour, Sebastian was true to his word. He danced with her, his movements fluid and commanding. It was the first time they had danced since their wedding, and Alice was struck by how well they moved together. His hand on her waist was firm, his guidance sure. People watched them, the dark, brooding Duke and his radiant Duchess. But then a disturbance near the entrance caught Sebastian's attention. A man in a grey livery whispered something urgently to him. Sebastian stiffened. "Alice, stay here. Do not move." "What is it?" "My investigator found something. He is outside. I will be 5 minutes." "Sebastian, wait." But he was already gone, disappearing into the crowd of masked revellers, leaving Alice standing alone near a pillar of roses. She waited, her heart beating a nervous rhythm. She scanned the room looking for his return. Minutes ticked by. 5. 10. "May I have this dance?" The voice came from behind her. It was smooth, oily, and terrifyingly familiar. Alice froze. She turned slowly. Standing there was a man in a red and gold domino mask. He was shorter than Sebastian, with a thicker build. His mouth was curved into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. It was Lord Reginald Crouch. "Lord Crouch," Alice said, her voice icy. "I did not know you were invited." "I have many friends, Alice." Crouch purred. He stepped closer, ignoring her flinch. "And I have missed you. You look expensive. Blackwood has kept you well." "My husband will be back in a moment," she warned. "Oh, I doubt that." Crouch laughed softly. "His investigator is on my payroll. The Duke is currently chasing a phantom carriage halfway to Kensington." Alice's blood ran cold. "What do you want? To dance?" Crouch said, grabbing her hand before she could pull away. He pulled her onto the floor. To make a scene would be scandalous. Alice had no choice but to follow his lead. He held her too tight, his hand damp on her back. "You think you won, don't you?" Crouch whispered in her ear as they spun. "You think you escaped me and married a prince, but you married a murderer." Alice missed a step. "I don't know what you are talking about." "Don't play the naive girl," Crouch hissed. "I was there, Alice, 10 years ago. I was the one your father-in-law was doing business with. I was the representative for the syndicate." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. It wasn't just a faceless criminal organization. It was Crouch. It had always been Crouch. "You," Alice breathed. "I was in the hallway." Crouch continued, his voice dripping with malice. "I heard the argument. I heard the gunshot. I saw Sebastian dragging the body. I have the original deed, Alice, the one the old Duke signed over to me before he died. Technically, Blackwood Manor belongs to me, and I have a witness statement written and sealed in a vault ready to be sent to Scotland Yard." "Why now?" Alice asked, trying to keep her voice steady, though her legs felt like jelly. "Why wait 10 years? Because 10 years ago, Sebastian was a boy with nothing liquid to his name. Now he is the richest man in England, and he has something I want." Crouch spun her around, pulling her chest flush against his. "I don't want the money, Alice. I have plenty. I want the status. I want the title. But most of all, I want to break him." He leaned back, looking into her eyes with a predatory gleam. "Here is the deal. You meet me tomorrow night. My carriage will be waiting. You leave him. You come to me willingly. You become my mistress. If you do, I burn the deed and the witness statement. Sebastian keeps his life and his freedom." "I would rather die," Alice spat. "Then Sebastian hangs," Crouch said simply. "Murdering a peer of the realm is a hanging offence, my dear. Even for a duke, especially when the motive was financial gain." The music ended. Crouch released her abruptly. "Tomorrow night? Midnight. The corner of Hyde Park. If you aren't there, the police get the file by morning." He bowed, mocking and low, and disappeared into the crowd. Alice stood alone in the middle of the dance floor, the applause of the crowd sounding like thunder. She felt sick. She felt a hand on her shoulder and jumped. It was Sebastian. He was breathless, his hair slightly disheveled. "It was a trick," he said, his voice tight with anger. "The investigator wasn't there. Alice, what's wrong? You're pale as a sheet." Alice looked up at her husband, the man who had saved her, the man who was tortured by a guilt he didn't deserve. If she told him, he would kill Crouch, and then he would truly be a murderer. But if she didn't tell him, nothing. She lied, forcing a smile that felt like glass shattering in her mouth. Just the heat. "Please, Sebastian, take me home." The morning after the masquerade ball, London was blanketed in a thick, choking fog. It was the kind of grey that seeped into the bones, turning the world into a ghost town. Inside the Blackwood townhouse, the silence was deafening. Alice sat at her vanity, staring at her reflection. She looked like a stranger. Her skin was pale, her eyes dark with sleeplessness. In the mirror, she didn't see a duchess. She saw a woman standing on the edge of a cliff preparing to jump. She had made her choice. Crouch held all the cards. If she stayed, he would go to Scotland Yard. He would produce the deed, the witness statement, and the motive. Sebastian would be arrested, dragged through the press, and hanged at Newgate Prison. The Iceman would be broken just as Crouch had promised. But if she left, if she sacrificed her reputation and her body, Sebastian would live. He would hate her. He would believe she was a faithless gold digger who ran off with a richer man. But he would be alive to hate her. "Alice!" She jumped, spinning around. Sebastian stood in the doorway of her bedroom. He was dressed for the day in a charcoal suit, but he looked tired. The stress of the investigation was wearing him down. He walked over to her, his expression softening as he looked at her pale face. "You didn't sleep." "Neither did you," she whispered. He knelt beside her chair, taking her cold hands in his. "I have men scouring the city for the person who sent that letter. We will find them, Alice. I promise you, you don't have to be afraid." The irony was a knife in her chest. He was hunting ghosts while the monster was standing right in front of them, smiling and shaking hands at parties. "Sebastian," she said, her voice trembling. She reached out, tracing the sharp line of his jaw. If something were to happen." "Nothing is going to happen," he said fiercely. He turned his head, kissing the palm of her hand. It was a gesture of such tenderness that it nearly broke her resolve. "I have spent 10 years pushing the world away. I will not let anyone take the one thing that has made this life bearable." Alice felt a tear slip down her cheek. He loved her. He hadn't said the words, but they were there in his eyes, in his touch. And that made what she had to do 1,000 times harder. "I have a headache," she lied, pulling her hand away gently. "I think I will rest today. Perhaps take a walk in the gardens later, if the fog clears." Sebastian stood up, reluctant to leave her. "I have a meeting with the solicitor at noon. I will be back by 3. We will dine together tonight. Just us. No staff." "I would like that," she said, forcing a smile. He hesitated, then leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't the chaste kiss of their wedding day, nor the desperate kiss of a man in panic. It was a kiss of promise. "Rest, Alice." When the door clicked shut, Alice collapsed forward onto her vanity, burying her face in her arms to stifle a sob. She allowed herself 2 minutes to weep. Then she wiped her face. She had work to do. She didn't pack a trunk. That would look suspicious. She took only a small velvet reticule. Inside, she placed a few sovereigns, her mother's locket, and a small, sharp letter opener made of silver that she had taken from the desk. Then she sat down to write the letter. It took her an hour. She went through 10 sheets of paper, her hands shaking. She couldn't tell him the truth. If he knew Crouch was blackmailing her, Sebastian would hunt him down and kill him, sealing his own fate. She had to make him believe she was leaving of her own free will. She had to break his heart to save his life. Sebastian, you were right. The darkness of Blackwood is too much for me. I thought I could play the part of the Duchess, but I am just a girl who wants a life of ease. I cannot live in the shadow of your sins anymore. Do not look for me. Alice. She placed the letter on his pillow in the master suite. It was a lie. Every word was a lie. But it was the only shield she had left to give him. At 11:30 p.m., the house was quiet. The servants were asleep. Sebastian was in his study, likely brooding over legal papers. Alice slipped out of the side door, wrapped in a dark cloak. The fog swallowed her instantly. She walked the damp streets of Mayfair, her heart pounding like a war drum, heading toward Hyde Park. Toward the devil. Midnight in Hyde Park was a place of shadows and secrets. The gas lamps sputtered in the mist, casting long, eerie shapes against the wet grass. Alice stood near the designated corner, shivering. The cold was biting, but the dread in her stomach was colder. A black carriage, with no crest on the door, emerged from the fog. The horses snorted their breath, visible in the air. The door opened, and Lord Crouch stepped out. He was wearing a heavy fur-lined coat and holding a silver-tipped cane. "You came." He smiled, a grotesque expression in the dim light. "I must admit, I had a bet with myself that you wouldn't show. I thought you'd run to your husband." "I am here," Alice said, her voice steel. "Now show me the proof. I want to see the deed and the witness statement before I step 1 foot in that carriage." Crouch chuckled. "Ever the negotiator." "Very well." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. He waved it in the air. "The original deed signed by the late Duke, and my sworn testimony. All right here, all ready to burn." "Give it to me," Alice demanded, stepping forward. Ah, Crouch tutted, stepping back. "First you get in the carriage. We drive to my estate in Kent. Once we are settled, then I burn it." "No," Alice said. "Burn it now." Crouch's smile vanished. He stepped closer, his face hardening. "You seem to have misunderstood your position, my dear. You are not making demands. You are surrendering." He lunged for her, grabbing her wrist. Alice didn't scream. She reacted. She used her free hand to pull the silver letter opener from her sleeve and slashed it across his hand. Crouch yelled in pain, dropping the cane. "You little bitch!" He backhanded her. The blow was heavy, catching her on the cheekbone. Alice fell to the wet grass, the world spinning. Before she could scramble away, Crouch was on top of her, his heavy knee pressing into her chest, pinning her down. "I was going to be gentle." He hissed, his face inches from hers, spitting with rage. "I was going to keep you as a pet. But now I'm going to break every bone in your pretty body." He signaled to the carriage driver. "Get the rope, tie her up." Alice struggled, kicking and clawing, but he was too heavy. Tears of frustration hot in her eyes. I failed, she thought. I failed. Suddenly, a gunshot cracked through the night air. The carriage lamp above them shattered raining glass onto the pavement. Crouch froze. "Get off her!" The voice was a low rumble, like a growl from the depths of hell. Alice turned her head. Emerging from the fog, pistol raised, was Sebastian. He didn't look like a duke. He looked like the angel of death. His coat was flying open, his hair was wild, and his eyes were pitch black, with a fury so intense the air around him seemed to crackle. "Sebastian!" Alice screamed. Crouch scrambled up, pulling Alice with him, using her as a human shield. He pulled a small revolver from his own coat pocket and pressed it to Alice's temple. "Stay back!" Crouch shrieked, his voice cracking. "I'll kill her! I swear to God! Thorn, I'll blow her brains out!" Sebastian stopped 10 paces away. He didn't lower his gun. He didn't even blink. "You think I care about your threats?" "Crouch," Sebastian said. His voice was terrifyingly calm. "You touched her. You're already a dead man." "I have the proof," Crouch yelled, waving the envelope with his bleeding hand. "I have the deed. I know you killed your father. If you shoot me, my lawyers release the copies. You'll hang—" "Let them release it," Sebastian said, taking a slow step forward. "Let them hang me. I don't care about the title. I don't care about the estate. I don't care about my life." He locked eyes with Alice. "I only care about her." Alice's heart stopped. He had found the letter. He had read the lie, and he had seen right through it. He had come for her, damning the consequences. "Drop the gun, Crouch," Sebastian commanded, "or I will put a bullet between your eyes before your finger can even twitch." Crouch was sweating now. He was a bully, not a warrior. He looked at Sebastian's steady hand, then at the terrified carriage driver who was already backing away. "You're bluffing," Crouch whispered. "Try me." The standoff lasted an eternity. The wind howled through the trees. Then Alice saw her chance. Crouch's grip on the gun had loosened slightly, as his sweat made his hands slick. She didn't wait for Sebastian to shoot. She stomped her heel down onto Crouch's instep with all her might. Crouch howled in pain. His arm jerked. Bang! Crouch's gun went off the bullet, tearing through the fabric of Alice's cloak, missing her ribs by an inch. Bang! Sebastian fired a split second later. Crouch screamed, clutching his right shoulder. Sebastian's aim had been true. He hadn't shot to kill. He had shot to disarm. Crouch dropped the gun and fell to his knees, clutching his shattered shoulder. Sebastian was on him in a heartbeat. He kicked the gun away and grabbed Crouch by the lapels, hauling him up and slamming him against the side of the carriage. "Give me the envelope," Sebastian roared. Crouch, weeping and bleeding, fumbled in his pocket with his good hand and threw the envelope onto the ground. "Take it. Take it, just don't kill me." Sebastian didn't let go. He looked ready to tear Crouch apart with his bare hands. The rage on his face was primal. "Sebastian, no." Alice cried, scrambling up from the grass. She ran to him, grabbing his arm. "Don't! If you kill him, you become what he says you are. Don't do it for him. Do it for me." Sebastian froze. He looked down at Alice. Her dress was muddy, her cheek was bruising, and she was shaking. But she was alive. Slowly the red haze cleared from his eyes. He shoved Crouch away with disgust. Crouch fell into the mud, sobbing. Sebastian turned to the carriage driver, who was cowering. "Get him out of here. If I ever see his face in London again, if he ever speaks my wife's name, I will finish what I started. Do you understand? Yes, Your Grace, yes." The driver dragged the wailing Lord Crouch into the carriage. With a crack of the whip, they vanished into the fog, leaving only the blood on the cobblestones. Sebastian stood there, his chest heaving. He looked at the envelope on the ground, the evidence that had haunted him for 10 years. Then he looked at Alice. He didn't pick up the envelope. He stepped over it and pulled Alice into his arms, crushing her against his chest. He buried his face in her hair, shaking uncontrollably. "You foolish, foolish woman." He choked out his voice, thick with emotion. "You thought you could leave me. You thought I would let you sacrifice yourself for me." "I had to," Alice sobbed, clinging to his coat. "I couldn't let you die." "I was already dead before I met you," Sebastian whispered against her ear. "You are the only thing that makes me alive. If you are gone, there is no life left to save." He pulled back, framing her face with his hands, his thumbs stroking away her tears. "I love you, Alice. I have loved you since the moment you ran into me in that garden. I was just too much of a coward to say it." Alice laughed a watery, broken sound. "You picked a hell of a time to admit it." Sebastian smiled, a real smile, one that reached his eyes and melted the last of the ice. He bent down and picked up the envelope. He held it up to the gas lamp. "Shall we see what 10 years of fear looks like?" He didn't open it. He simply struck a match against the lamp post and held it to the corner of the paper. "Sebastian, wait. You should check if—" "I don't care," he said, watching the flames eat the paper. "It doesn't matter anymore. Let him talk. Let him tell the world. I have you. We will face it together." They stood in the dark park, illuminated by the burning evidence of the past, watching the ashes float away into the fog. The Iceman of London was gone. In his place was a man who had walked through fire for the woman he loved. And as the last ember died out, he swept her up into his arms, carrying her out of the darkness and toward home. And so the cold walls of Blackwood Manor were finally warmed by a love that was forged in fire and sealed in blood. Sebastian and Alice didn't just survive the scandal. They conquered it. The rumours about the old Duke eventually faded, and Lord Crouch was never seen in London society again. Some say he fled to the Americas, terrified of the Duke's wrath. But for Sebastian and Alice, the only truth that mattered was the one they built together. If you loved this story of danger, sacrifice, and a love that defies all odds, please give this video a like. It really helps the channel grow. What did you think of Alice's decision to sacrifice herself? Would you have done the same? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Thanks for watching.